Hello, and welcome to the Earth's Library, a quiet place to turn the stone pages of our planet's long story without hurry. Tonight, we will drift into one of the most profound and recently answered questions of our own existence. We see ourselves as a story of inevitable success, an unbroken chain stretching back through time, a river of humanity growing ever wider. But what if that river once ran dry? What if our entire lineage, which now numbers in the billions, was once cut down to a handful of survivors? Their continued existence so fragile it was almost an impossibility. This sounds like a myth, a creation story of a desperate new beginning. But a stunning discovery has revealed that this is the true, forgotten story of us. Before we begin our descent into this deep past, allow me to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? Are you in a bustling city, surrounded by the quiet hum of a million lives? Or are you somewhere more remote, where the silence feels vast and ancient? And when was the last time you paused to consider the sheer, staggering improbability of your own life, of any human life at all? It's a thought that can feel overwhelming, a sense of fragility in the face of an immense and indifferent universe. And it is in that feeling that our story tonight is rooted. If you find this kind of quiet, unfolding journey into our planet's mysteries comforting, I would be grateful if you considered leaving a like or subscribing. It helps this small, calm corner of the world find others who might be searching for it. I promise that nothing here is rushed, nothing is loud, just ideas carried gently forward, like a slow current. So let us begin, not with an ancient myth, but with a new and astonishing fact, unearthed not from stone, but from the genetic code that every one of us carries within ourselves. The thought that our lineage was nearly erased is easier to entertain when you remember that the book of our history is not finished. New chapters are being discovered all the time. Just recently, in 2023, geneticists uncovered a lost chapter from our deep past. Around 900,000 years ago, our ancestors faced a cataclysm that wiped out 98.7% of their population. For over 100,000 years, the entire breeding population of our direct ancestors on Earth numbered only 1,280 individuals. This is not a story of a great civilization. This is the story of a single tiny village, carrying the fate of all future humanity, clinging to existence on a planet that seemed determined to erase them. The clues to this immense, forgotten catastrophe were not found etched in stone or buried in the African dust. They were found much closer to home, hidden in plain sight within the DNA of every human living today. For decades, geneticists have been puzzled by a strange feature of our species. For a planet-dominating population of 8 billion, our genetic diversity is incredibly low. Our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees, who live in small, scattered groups across Africa, possess far more genetic variation than all of humanity combined. This is a classic telltale sign, the genetic fingerprint of a species that has been through a devastating population crash, an event known as a bottleneck. Scientists knew a bottleneck had occurred, but its true scale and ancient timing remained a mystery, until a new generation of genetic analysis tools allowed us to read our own history with unprecedented clarity. The story of this discovery began just a few years ago in the labs of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. A team of researchers was analyzing the genomes of over 3,000 people from diverse populations across the world. Using our DNA as a kind of molecular clock, they were tracing genetic mutations backward through the generations, watching the story of our species unfold in reverse.
As they looked deeper and deeper into the past, they saw something startling. Around 900,000 years ago, the data simply collapses. The rich, branching river of human genetic history suddenly narrows to a single, impossibly thin thread. The mathematical models were screaming that something catastrophic had happened, but the numbers were so extreme, the researchers at first refused to believe them. Their analysis suggested that the ancestral population of all humanity had been reduced to a group smaller than a typical high school. Convinced it had to be a glitch in their new methods, they spent years rerunning the analysis, checking and triple-checking the results. But every time, the conclusion was the same, and just as terrifying. Around 930,000 years ago, 98.7% of our direct ancestors were wiped out. The survivors, a breeding population of only about 1,200 individuals, remained at this critically low number for over 100,000 years. In the world of biology, this is known as the extinction vortex. When a species' population falls this low, it almost never recovers. Inbreeding weakens the gene pool, and a single localized disaster can easily erase the few remaining survivors. By all accounts, our story should have ended there, but somehow, impossibly, it did not. And this raises the next profound question. What external event could have brought our ancestors to the very edge of oblivion?
The force that brought our ancestors to their knees was not a sudden cataclysm from the heavens, but a slow and relentless transformation of the earth itself. The timing of the genetic bottleneck aligns perfectly with a period known to geologists as the early Middle Pleistocene transition, a time when the planet's climate system fundamentally and violently changed its rhythm. For millions of years prior, the Earth's ice ages had followed a relatively predictable pattern, arriving in 41,000-year cycles. But around 900,000 years ago, this steady pulse broke down. The cycles shifted to a new and brutal 100,000-year pattern, bringing with them glaciations of a severity the world had not seen before. Ice sheets of immense size grew to cover huge portions of the northern continents, while sea levels plummeted by hundreds of feet. For our ancestors, who were likely living in Africa at the time, the direct threat was not the ice itself, but the thirst it created. These massive northern glaciers acted like an atmospheric dam, disrupting the weather patterns that brought life-giving monsoon rains to the African continent. The result was a prolonged and catastrophic period of aridification. Imagine watching your world die over the course of generations. The lush woodlands your grandparents knew have become arid scrubland, and that scrubland is now turning into a desolate, dry wasteland. The rivers that once flowed year-round are now just cracked mud for most of the year. The great herds of animals you once hunted have vanished, and the familiar plants that sustained your people are becoming scarce and withered. This was a perfect storm for a mass extinction event, and for most of the human populations scattered across Africa and Eurasia, that is exactly what it was. They were simply wiped out. The fossil record from this period is almost completely empty, a silent testament to this great dying. Yet, somewhere, likely in a hidden refuge on the African continent, a single, tiny group managed to hold on. But as this small band of survivors endured this century-long crisis, something remarkable was happening within their very cells. A strange genetic accident that would permanently alter the human blueprint and become a scar of survival that all 8 billion of us carry to this day. The immense pressure of the bottleneck, that 100,000-year-long winter of our lineage, did more than just test the will of our ancestors. It left a permanent physical scar on our species' genetic code. This scar is a profound biological puzzle. If you compare our own genetic blueprint to that of our closest living relatives, you will find a strange discrepancy. Chimpanzees and gorillas have 48 chromosomes, arranged in 24 pairs. Humans, however, have only 46. For decades, this missing pair was a mystery, but the answer is a dramatic confirmation of our ancient story. We are not missing a pair of chromosomes. Instead, 2 of our ancestral chromosomes fused together, merging into one in a single, incredibly rare event. This fusion created what is now known as human chromosome 2, and when we examine it under a genetic microscope, the evidence of this ancient merger is as clear as a scar on skin. A normal chromosome has a single centromere at its center and protective caps called telomeres at its ends. Our chromosome 2 is unique in the entire animal kingdom. It has the distinct molecular remnants of 2 centromeres, one of which has been deactivated, and in its center, exactly where the fusion would have occurred, we find the dormant, fused together telomere sequences from the ends of the 2 original chromosomes. It is the forensic evidence of a genetic accident that occurred deep in our past. This incredibly rare event happened right in the middle of our near extinction. In a large and healthy population, such a major mutation would almost certainly be diluted and disappear. But in a tiny population of only 1,280 breeding individuals, a rare genetic trait can spread and become a universal feature of the entire species within just a few generations. Today, every single one of the 8 billion humans on Earth carries this fused chromosome. Some researchers believe this was more than just an accident. The genes located near the fusion site on chromosome 2 are known to affect neural function and brain development. It is a profound and poetic possibility that the very genetic event that marked our darkest hour may have also been a catalyst for the evolution of the larger, more complex brain that would ultimately allow our lineage to not just survive, but to one day inherit the Earth. The story of the fused chromosome is a dramatic and permanent scar written into the very heart of our DNA. A story this profound of a species brought to the very edge of oblivion should have left other clues. Yet, for decades, when paleoanthropologists looked at the period between roughly 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, they found an unnerving silence. This has long been known as the fossil gap, a frustratingly blank chapter in the human story, with a near total absence of hominin fossils from both Africa and Europe. The new genetic evidence of the bottleneck provides the key to this old mystery. The reason for the fossil gap is brutally simple. There were barely any humans around to leave fossils behind. The chances of any one of those few thousand individuals dying in the precise conditions required for their bones to be preserved for nearly 1 million years were infinitesimally small. For a long time, the genetic evidence was just as difficult to interpret. Scientists knew our species had been through at least one major population crash, a well-documented bottleneck that occurred when a small group of modern humans migrated out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. But the signal from this more recent and less severe event masked the deeper, more ancient catastrophe. Older genetic analysis methods were like trying to read a book through a keyhole. They could tell something had happened, but could not reveal the full, shocking picture. It was only with the development of powerful new computational tools, like the FitCol method, that scientists were finally able to crack the code. These new techniques can analyze thousands of genomes at once, allowing them to see our genetic history with a clarity that was previously impossible. When the findings were published in 2023,
The scientific community was stunned. It was not just the sheer severity of the population crash that was so shocking, but its almost unbelievable duration. Most evolutionary bottlenecks are brief, a volcanic eruption or a disease that wipes out a population, followed by a relatively rapid recovery. But our ancestors endured their crisis for 117,000 years. This was not a momentary disaster. It was an extended near-death experience for an entire species. This raises the most profound question of all. Somewhere on the ancient African continent, how did a tiny band of our ancestors manage to find a refuge, a pocket of stability, where they could hold on for over 100,000 years, while the world around them fell apart?
To endure for 117,000 years on the knife's edge of extinction is a feat of resilience that is difficult to comprehend. The survival of our ancestors was not a matter of simple luck, but a story of strategy, cooperation, and ingenuity. According to archaeologists who have reviewed the genetic findings, this tiny population must have found a very localized area with good social cohesion for it to survive. They needed a refuge, a pocket of stability in a world that had fallen into chaos, and they needed to work together in ways that no humans had before. The leading hypothesis is that this refuge, or perhaps a network of refuges, was located near a reliable and persistent source of water. This could have been one of the Great Lakes in the East African Rift Valley, or a river system that kept flowing even as the continent was ravaged by drought. Water is the anchor of life. Where there is water, animals will come to drink, and where there are animals, there is a source of food. But a stable location was not enough. In a group this small, social harmony was paramount. This was a time when every individual was precious, and cooperation was not just a virtue, but the most essential tool for survival. However, their most powerful technology was likely the one that allowed them to create a small circle of light and warmth in a dangerous world: the mastery of fire. While earlier humans had used fire opportunistically, this long crisis likely forced our ancestors to perfect its control. Fire changes everything. It provided protection, keeping the great predators of the night at bay. It extended the day, allowing for more time to work on tools, and, crucially, for the social bonding that was essential to their survival. Most importantly, fire revolutionized their diet. Cooking food makes it safer, killing parasites and bacteria that could easily wipe out a fragile family group. It also unlocks vastly more nutrients, breaking down tough proteins in meat and making many roots and tubers digestible for the first time. The archaeological evidence provides a stunning confirmation of this idea. Around 800,000 years ago, there was a sudden and significant increase in the systematic use of fire by human populations. This timing corresponds almost perfectly with the end of the genetic bottleneck, the moment when the population of survivors finally began to expand again. This is almost certainly not a coincidence. The mastery of fire may have been the key technological breakthrough that allowed our ancestors to finally break free from the extinction vortex and begin their long recovery. With a safe refuge and the warmth of a controlled fire, the daily, relentless challenge for our ancestors was finding enough calories to survive in a world of scarcity. With most of the large game animals having gone extinct, the hunting strategies that had defined their forebears were no longer an option. They were forced to adapt, to become what anthropologists call dietary generalists. The new rule for survival was simple: you ate everything. This was not a life of grand hunts, but of meticulous, patient foraging, requiring an encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world. Their diet would have been built from the small and the hidden things that the ruined world could still offer. A primary and reliable food source would have been insects. Termites, crickets, and beetle larvae
pound for pound, are some of the most nutritious and protein-rich foods on the planet. They also reproduce quickly, meaning even small populations could be harvested sustainably. Our ancestors would have become expert entomologists, knowing the seasons and habits of every edible bug. They would have also spent a great deal of their time digging for roots and tubers, the underground storage organs of plants that were protected from the heat and drought on the surface. This required them to be master botanists, possessing a deep, generational knowledge of which plants were safe to eat, which were toxic unless prepared in a specific way, and which could be stored for the lean times that were sure to come. When they did find meat, it was likely not from a glorious hunt, but from clever scavenging. They would have tracked the great predators, waiting for a chance to move in on a carcass to take what was left. They would have learned to spot the vulnerable, a young antelope separated from its herd, an injured zebra, or an old elephant dying of thirst. The mastery of fire was crucial to this new diet. Cooking not only made scavenged meat safer by killing parasites and bacteria, but it also unlocked the full potential of the plant world. Many of the roots and tubers they relied on would have been indigestible or even poisonous when raw. Cooking them made them a vital source of carbohydrates. This was not a simple existence. It was a life of immense cognitive demand, requiring a level of knowledge and awareness that was, in itself, a powerful force of natural selection.
The immense library of knowledge required to survive, the location of every water source, the properties of every plant, the habits of every animal, was the most precious and fragile resource our ancestors possessed. In a tiny population where the death of a single elder could erase a generation's worth of wisdom, survival depended not just on finding food, but on preserving and transmitting this vital information. This necessity became one of the most powerful selective forces in human history, shaping the very nature of our minds and our societies. In this evolutionary pressure cooker, social bonds were everything. With groups so small, internal conflict was a death sentence. Every individual was precious. Natural selection would have fiercely favored those who were best at cooperation, at sharing scarce resources, and at resolving disputes without violence. This intense codependence created a teaching imperative. Survival demanded the high-fidelity transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. Our ancestors would have become obsessive teachers, passing down every scrap of information to their children. Over thousands of generations, this process would have selected for brains that were hardwired to learn and to teach. This wasn't just about raw intelligence, it was about social intelligence. Living in these tiny, interdependent groups for millennia refined the ability to read other people, to anticipate their needs, to build trust, and to work together towards a common goal. This intense social environment likely perfected what psychologists call theory of mind, the complex ability to understand that other people have thoughts and intentions different from your own. The 1,280 or so breeding individuals were not all living in one place. They were likely scattered in smaller family bands across their refuge. This structure, known as a metapopulation, ensured that a single local disaster could not wipe everyone out, but it also required a way to maintain connections and share knowledge and genes across the landscape. The archaeological record from the late bottleneck period shows stone tools that are more sophisticated and, crucially, more standardized across different regions.
This suggests the existence of communication networks between these isolated groups, a sharing of ideas and techniques that kept the human story alive. For 117,000 years, this social and intellectual toolkit was the key to their survival, a quiet revolution of the mind that was preparing them for the day the world finally began to heal.
For 117,000 years, our ancestors held on, their survival a quiet testament to their resilience and ingenuity. Then, around 813,000 years ago, the world began to change again. The brutal, long-phase ice ages that had plagued the planet began to soften. The rains, weak and erratic from millennia, started to return with more regularity. Slowly, patiently, the grasslands began to expand again, and the animal populations that had vanished started to recover. The Great Crisis was ending, but the humans who emerged from this long winter were not the same as those who had entered it. The 117,000 years of intense natural selection had transformed them. They were a species that had been forged in the crucible of near extinction, emerging smarter, more cooperative, and more adaptable. When the climate improved, they were perfectly poised to inherit this recovering world. Their population growth was explosive. Within just a few thousand years, the descendants of the 1,280 survivors had multiplied into the hundreds of thousands, spreading out from their ancient refuge to repopulate Africa and begin expanding into Europe and Asia once more. But the bottleneck had done something more profound than just test them. It had acted as a kind of evolutionary spring-loading. The immense pressure applied for so long to such a small population had set the stage for a major speciation event. That single recovering population of survivors began to split, erupting outwards along three distinct evolutionary paths. The first group remained in Africa, continuing to adapt to the continent's fluctuating climates. This lineage would eventually become us, Homo sapiens. The second group moved north and west, pushing into the colder, more seasonal environments of Europe and Western Asia. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they would adapt to become the Neanderthals. The third group went east, spreading across the vast and varied landscapes of Asia. They would become the mysterious Denisovans. The single, desperate story of human survival had now become three. Each of these new human species carried the shared genetic legacy of the bottleneck, the fused chromosome, the reduced diversity, and the cognitive traits forged in the crisis. But now they would take that inheritance and use it to conquer different corners of the ancient world.
The great rebound that followed the bottleneck was not a simple expansion, but a grand divergence. The single surviving population, forged in the fires of near extinction, now split and went its separate ways, embarking on three unique evolutionary journeys. It was a planetary experiment. How would this shared genetic legacy, this inheritance of resilience, fare in three vastly different corners of the ancient world? The group that moved north and west into Europe and Western Asia walked into a world of dramatic climatic swings. They became the Neanderthals, a species sculpted by the relentless advance and retreat of the great Ice Age glaciers. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they adapted to a life in the cold, developing robust muscular bodies and dense bones, built for power and endurance in a harsh landscape. Their skulls evolved massive nasal passages to warm and humidify the frigid, dry air they breathed. And their brains grew to a size that was, on average, even larger than our own today. They were not the brutish caveman of myth, but master hunters and innovators, the undisputed apex predators of Ice Age Europe. They hunted in coordinated groups, capable of taking down the most formidable megafauna of their time. They developed sophisticated new technologies, creating the first hafted tools in human history, carefully crafted spear points and knives attached to wooden handles. This required foresight and abstract thought, representing a major cognitive leap. Most profoundly, the Neanderthals were the first human species to systematically bury their dead, sometimes with grave goods, a practice that suggests the stirrings of symbolic thought and a meaningful conception of life and loss. While this specialized lineage mastered the challenges of the cold north, the other two branches of the human family were on different paths. In Asia, the mysterious Denisovans were adapting to a vast range of environments, from high mountain plateaus to tropical islands. And back in Africa, the lineage that had stayed behind was being shaped by a different pressure entirely. Not the predictable challenge of the cold, but the constant, unpredictable chaos of a fluctuating climate. A force that would favor not physical specialization, but a new and radical kind of adaptability.
While the Neanderthals were being sculpted into masters of the cold by the relentless ice ages of Europe, their enigmatic eastern cousins, the Denisovans, were spreading across the vast and varied continent of Asia. The story of the Denisovans is a profound testament to the power of modern science, for they are a people we know almost entirely through the genetic ghosts they left behind. Our entire knowledge of this major branch of the human family comes primarily from a few tiny, unglamorous fossils, a single finger bone and a couple of teeth unearthed from the floor of a cave in Siberia. For a long time, their identity was a complete mystery, but when scientists managed the near miraculous feat of extracting a full genome from that tiny finger bone, they revealed a completely new and previously unknown chapter in the human story. The DNA confirmed that the Denisovans were a sister lineage to the Neanderthals, having split from their common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years earlier. And it showed that they were not a small, isolated group, but a vast and incredibly successful population that had adapted to a staggering range of environments across Asia. Their genetic legacy, found in modern human populations today, tells a story of remarkable adaptability. Some Denisovan populations adapted to the thin air of high altitudes, evolving genetic variants that helped them process oxygen more efficiently on the formidable Tibetan Plateau. These are the same life-saving genes that many modern Tibetans have inherited from their ancient Denisovan ancestors. Others appear to have been skilled seafarers, as their DNA is found in modern Pacific Islander populations, like those in Papua New Guinea, who carry up to 6% Denisovan ancestry, a legacy that suggests their forebears managed to cross open water to reach distant islands. While these two lineages specialized for their respective worlds, the human population that remained in Africa was being forged by a different kind of pressure. Africa, even after the worst of the Great Crisis had ended, remained a place of intense climatic instability. Unlike the more predictable, albeit harsh, cycles of the European Ice Age, the African environment was a chaotic mosaic of unpredictable droughts and floods. This constant churn did not select for a body that was physically specialized for one condition. Instead, it selected for a mind that was supremely flexible and innovative. This was the crucible that forged Homo sapiens. Natural selection in Africa favored the traits that would come to define us: the capacity for rapid problem solving, the ability to develop new technologies quickly, and the formation of large, complex social networks that could share information and resources over vast distances.
The source of our success was not in becoming a finely tuned instrument for a single environment, but in becoming a master of adaptation itself. If the specialized Neanderthals were like a finely tuned racing car, perfectly built for the Ice Age track, our ancestors were more like an all-terrain vehicle, not as perfectly optimized for any single condition, but capable of handling whatever the world threw at them. For hundreds of thousands of years, these three human realities unfolded in parallel. Three successful, intelligent species, all children of the Great Bottleneck, but each becoming a different answer to the question of what it means to be human.
For hundreds of thousands of years, the world was home to this human mosaic, a quiet testament to the divergent paths taken after the Great Bottleneck. But around 60,000 years ago, the final act of this deep time drama began. A small group of our direct ancestors, the behaviorally modern Homo sapiens, who had been forged in the African crucible, finally left their home continent and began to expand into the rest of the world. As they pushed into the Middle East, they walked into lands that were already inhabited. For the first time in nearly 500,000 years, our direct ancestors came face to face with their long-lost cousins, the Neanderthals. We can only imagine the curiosity and fear of that first encounter, seeing another kind of human, so similar yet so different, shorter, immensely powerful, with a mind that had been shaped by a different world. What we know for certain is that this was not a simple story of immediate conquest. The proof is written in our own genes. These two peoples interbred. Today, nearly everyone of non-African descent carries around 2% Neanderthal DNA, a permanent genetic echo of these ancient encounters. In Asia, our ancestors met and interbred with the Denisovans as well, whose genetic legacy is still carried by modern populations across Asia and Oceania. For thousands of years, there was a complex dance of coexistence and competition. But ultimately, our species possessed a set of advantages that proved decisive. Around 45,000 years ago, modern humans developed what is known as the Upper Paleolithic Toolkit, a revolutionary set of technologies that changed the rules of the game. They created sophisticated spear throwers that could kill from a safe distance, bone needles to sew fitted clothing for the cold, and fish hooks and nets that unlocked new food sources. This new efficiency was a force multiplier. A hunting party of modern humans could achieve with 8 people what might have taken 20 Neanderthals. This allowed our ancestors to support larger populations and expand more rapidly, even in the harsh Ice Age climates. The Neanderthals, who were specialized masters of their environment, found themselves slowly outcompeted by a species that was a master of adaptation itself. They were not wiped out in a great war, but were gradually pushed into more marginal lands, their populations shrinking over millennia, until, around 28,000 years ago, the last of them vanished from their final refuges in southern Spain. By 20,000 years ago, Homo sapiens stood as the only human species left on Earth. Their success, a product of the very flexibility that had been instilled in them during the long, desperate centuries of the bottleneck.
The story of the Great Bottleneck, our species' long and desperate winter, does not end with the disappearance of our ancient cousins. The echoes of that 117,000-year-long crisis still reverberate today, written into our modern world, our societies, and our very cells. The near extinction of our ancestors is not just a forgotten chapter of history, it is the ghost in our machine, the invisible force that shaped our greatest strengths and our most profound weaknesses. The scars are perhaps the most obvious. During the bottleneck, our lineage lost an estimated 65% of its total genetic diversity. This genetic impoverishment has consequences we live with today. It is why, as a species, we are unusually susceptible to certain diseases and have weaker immune systems compared to other primates. It is also why some genetic disorders persist in our populations. In a tiny gene pool, quirks that would normally be diluted can become locked in, permanent features of the species. In a strange and poetic way, our modern fragility is the most definitive proof of our ancestors' ancient strength. But for every scar, the bottleneck bestowed a gift. The 117,000 years spent in that evolutionary pressure cooker forged the very traits that now define our success. It explains our unique capacity for large-scale cooperation. For 4,000 generations, survival was only possible through intense collaboration. A natural selection ruthlessly filtered for individuals who could share, trust, and work together. It also explains our obsession with teaching. In a group where losing the knowledge of a single elder could be catastrophic, there was immense selective pressure for those who were best at transmitting information to the next generation. We became a species addicted to learning and sharing what we learned. This intense trial also explains our unique relationship with technology. We evolved into a creature that sees the entire world as raw materials for solving problems, because for 1,000 centuries, our survival depended on it. Perhaps the most profound legacy of this shared trauma is the simple biological proof of our fundamental unity. The genetic discovery of the bottleneck completely obliterates the idea of meaningful biological races. Every single person alive on Earth today, all 8 billion of us, descends from that same tiny group of approximately 1,280 survivors. The genetic differences between any two human populations are smaller than the differences found within a single troop of chimpanzees. From the Aboriginal Australians, to the Polynesians who navigated the Pacific, to the Europeans who endured the Ice Age, we are all recent cousins, carrying the same genetic toolkit of survival. As the source material so eloquently states, there is no them, there's only us. We are one family, bound by the memory of a time when we almost weren't a family at all.
The discovery of this great bottleneck is more than just a new chapter in our ancient history. It is a mirror held up to our present and our future. The story of our near extinction is a profound lesson, a narrative that serves as both a warning and a promise. The warning is that our success is not inevitable, and our tenure on this planet is not guaranteed. The bottleneck is a sobering reminder that past climate disasters have brought our species to the very brink of annihilation, proving that we are not invulnerable. The promise, however, is that we carry the genetic and cultural legacy of the ultimate survivors. The ancestors who made it through were not just lucky. They were supremely adaptable, innovative, and cooperative. Those traits are not lost to the past. They are still within us. This ancient legacy is not an abstract concept. It echoes in our modern lives in countless ways. Every time you solve a complex problem, you are using the cognitive skills that were relentlessly selected for during those millennia of crisis. Every time you cooperate with strangers to achieve a common goal, you are expressing the behavioral patterns that held those tiny, fragile groups together. And every time you teach a child something new, you are participating in the knowledge-sharing traditions that were the only way to carry crucial survival information across 4,000 generations. The 1,280 survivors live on in us, not metaphorically, but literally, in our chromosomes, our neural patterns, and our innate capacity for resilience. We are the species that emerged from the crucible, proven to be capable of surviving conditions that would have destroyed almost any other. The story of those who refuse to give up is the inheritance of all 8 billion people on Earth today. It is a story that gives us reason for both humility and hope. Humility because we know that our current dominance is not a birthright but a hard-won prize. And hope because we know that our species possesses a deep, tested capacity to face down the impossible. Now that we understand the science of what happened and the legacy it left behind, our journey must take a new turn. It is time to step back from the genetics and the geology and into the world of our ancestors. It is time to imagine what it was truly like to be one of the survivors, to live through that long, desperate, and ultimately triumphant winter of humanity.
Let us now step away from the modern world, away from the genetics and the geology, and travel back in time. Let us try to imagine what it was truly like to be one of the survivors, to live through the longest and most desperate chapter in human history. The year is 900,000 years ago, and your world is ending. It is not ending in a sudden flash of fire from the sky, but in a slow, brutal, and agonizing decline, one failed season at a time. You are part of a small band of early humans, perhaps 30 or 40 individuals, an extended family living on a landscape that is growing more hostile by the day. Scientists today would argue about what to call your species, perhaps a late Homo erectus or an early Homo heidelbergensis. But what matters is that you are human enough, and right now, you are watching your world disappear. The forests where your elders hunted are now just scrubland, and that scrubland is slowly turning to desert. The great rivers that once flowed year-round have become seasonal streams, and now they are often just beds of cracked mud. The daily routine is a brutal, relentless cycle. Wake up, find water, find food, and do not get killed. Water comes first, always. In a landscape of profound and catastrophic dryness, your people have developed an almost supernatural ability to read the land, to find the hidden springs, or to know where to dig a crude well to reach the groundwater that will sustain you through another day. Your entire world is this small band of kin. With a total breeding population of only around 1,280 individuals scattered across the continent, you cannot afford to be selective about partners. Inbreeding is inevitable, and its consequences are a quiet, constant sorrow. Genetic disorders, reduced fertility, a fragility that haunts your small community. Because of this, every individual is precious. You cannot afford conflict. You have learned to share resources, even when they are desperately scarce. You have learned to care for the sick and the injured instead of abandoning them. This is not a choice. It is the price of survival. This is life inside the evolutionary pressure cooker, a time of desperate struggle that was, generation by generation, forging a new and more cooperative kind of human. The sun rises on another day, and the relentless search for sustenance must begin again. The sun climbs higher in the pale, dusty sky, and with thirst held at bay for another morning, the second and all-consuming task of the day begins: the search for food. The great herds that your ancestors followed are gone, ghosts on a landscape that can no longer support them. You are now a dietary generalist, a master of finding sustenance in a world of small and hidden things. The hunt is no longer a glorious, coordinated pursuit of a single large animal, but a patient and intricate collection of whatever the arid land will offer. Your eyes and the eyes of your small band are trained on the ground. A flicker of movement in the dry grass might be a cricket, a good source of protein.
An overturned log might reveal beetle larvae, and a crumbling termite mound is a true bounty. To an outsider, this would look like desperation. To your people, it is a science, a reliable and sustainable way of life learned over 1,000 generations. An elder points with a digging stick, indicating a patch of withered-looking vines. Here, the real knowledge is required. Your people are expert botanists, carrying a vast mental library of the plant world. They know which roots and tubers grow deep underground, protected from the sun and drought. They know which are safe to eat, which are toxic unless carefully prepared, and which can be stored for the lean days that are always sure to come. On a lucky day, a scout will return with news of a greater prize, not a creature brought down by your own hands, but a gift from the landscape's harsh justice. An old elephant finally succumbed to thirst, or the remains of a zebra kill, abandoned by a predator. This is when your simple stone tools become essential, used to quickly and efficiently take what you can. As dusk settles, your band gathers back at your temporary shelter, the fire a small glowing heart in the immense darkness. This is where the day's meager harvest is transformed. The fire is the key to your survival. Cooking the scavenged meat kills the parasites and bacteria that could destroy your fragile group. Even more importantly, the flames unlock the full potential of the plants you've gathered. Many of the roots that are indigestible or even poisonous when raw become rich sources of carbohydrates after being cooked. The fire is your external stomach, your tool for turning a hostile world into a livable one. As the food is shared among all members of the group, the quiet ritual reinforces the truth that has kept you alive. Survival here depends not on the strength of one, but on the knowledge and cooperation of all.
The fire crackles, a small beacon of warmth against the immense, indifferent darkness of the African night. The hard-won meal of insects, roots, and scavenged meat is shared among the small band, a quiet ritual of survival. But the true nourishment that sustains this tiny flicker of humanity is not in the calories consumed, but in the knowledge that was required to gather them. In a world without writing, the collective memory of the group is the only library that exists, and every elder is a precious, irreplaceable volume. The loss of a single experienced mind could mean the loss of the location of a hidden spring, or the subtle distinction between a nourishing plant and a deadly poison. Preserving and transmitting this library of knowledge was the most critical task they faced, and it fundamentally reshaped the human mind. Survival in this era depended on what archaeologists call a teaching imperative. The process of educating the next generation would have been constant and all-consuming. An elder would not just point to a plant, but would guide a child's hand, showing them precisely how to dig for the tuber without destroying the root system for the next season. They would teach them to read the subtle landscape, to follow the tracks of small animals, to understand the cycles of the seasons. This relentless need to transfer complex information with high fidelity would have created intense selective pressure for brains that were not just good at learning, but specifically designed for social learning, the ability to acquire knowledge by observing, imitating, and listening to others. This necessity fostered a level of cooperation that was unprecedented. In a group this small and fragile, every individual was precious, and sharing resources was not a choice, but a law of survival. A discovery made by one person immediately became the property of the entire band. This deep social cohesion, this web of absolute interdependence, was the safety net that allowed them to endure for 1,000 centuries.
It was in this environment that complex language was likely refined. The need to share detailed life or death information. The red berries by the river are safe, but only after the first rain, would have favored a communication system far more sophisticated than simple gestures. Language was the technology that bound their library of minds together, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors was not lost to the dust.
The web of knowledge shared within a single band was a powerful tool for survival, but it was also tragically fragile. A localized disaster, a sudden flood, a spreading disease, a devastating fire could easily erase a single band and its entire library of wisdom forever. The ultimate key to our ancestors' survival, therefore, was not just the strength of a single community, but the resilience of a scattered network. The genetic evidence is clear that the 1,280 or so breeding individuals were not all living together in one valley. Instead, they persisted in what biologists call a metapopulation, a collection of small, distinct groups scattered across the landscape but connected by the occasional exchange of migrants and genes. This structure was humanity's greatest insurance policy against total extinction. The source material uses a powerful analogy to describe it: a desperate 117,000-year-long game of whack-a-mole. Individual bands were the moles. Droughts, disasters, and diseases were the hammers. Some groups would inevitably get hit and disappear, but others would survive. These surviving bands could then send out individuals to recolonize the empty territories, keeping the overall network alive. While the fate of any one family was uncertain, the structure of the metapopulation ensured that the human story as a whole would continue. The archaeological record supports this idea of a connected network. Stone tools from the late bottleneck period show a cultural convergence, similar designs appearing in different regions at roughly the same time. This suggests that these groups were not completely isolated. There must have been communication, trade routes, or perhaps regular sacred gatherings where bands would meet to exchange not just goods, but knowledge and genes. These rare gatherings would have been the lifeblood of the human species, a time to reinforce the social glue that held the fragile network together. Genetic evidence points to structured breeding patterns, meaning our ancestors had developed kinship systems and rules for exchanging marriage partners between groups. For thousands of generations, this desperate game continued, some bands thriving, others perishing, but the network always holding. And then, around 813,000 years ago, the world began to change. The first signs were subtle: a little more rain, the slow recovery of the grasslands, the return of small herds of animals. The great crisis was finally coming to an end, and the humans who had been forged and refined by its immense pressures were now poised to reclaim the world.
For 117,000 years, the human story was one of quiet endurance, a story lived out by a fragile network of survivors in a world that had forgotten them. But then, around 813,000 years ago, the planet's long fever began to break. The great climate cycles shifted once more, and the rains, so long absent, began to return to the African continent. The grasslands, which had withered to dust, slowly began to recover, and with them, the animal populations started to rebound. The great crisis was ending, but the humans who met this new dawn were not the same as those who had entered the long night. The 117,000 years of intense natural selection had transformed them. They were a species forged anew, emerging from the bottleneck, smarter,
more cooperative, and better adapted to survive than any of their ancestors had been. Poised on the edge of this recovering world, they were ready. As the environment became more hospitable, their population growth was explosive. Within the span of just a few thousand years, a mere blink in evolutionary time, the descendants of the 1,280 survivors multiplied into the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. They spread out from whatever refuge had sheltered them, rapidly repopulating the African continent and beginning to push into Europe and Asia once more. But this was not simply the refilling of an empty world. The bottleneck had done something unprecedented to human evolution. The source material describes it with a powerful analogy. If you force a great river through the narrowest possible channel for 100,000 years, and then suddenly remove the constraint, the water does not just flow, it erupts, carving new and divergent channels in every direction. This is what happened to the human lineage. That single population of survivors, genetically primed by the long crisis, exploded and then split, branching onto 3 distinct evolutionary paths that would define the next chapter of human history. One group remained in Africa, where the climate continued to be highly variable, constantly demanding new solutions and rewarding behavioral flexibility. This was the lineage that would, in the far future, become us, Homo sapiens. A second group pushed north and west into the colder, more seasonal climates of Europe. There, they would be sculpted by the great ice ages into a new and powerful form of human, the Neanderthals. The third group went east, spreading across the vast and diverse landscapes of Asia, from the high plateaus to the tropical islands. These would become the enigmatic Denisovans. The single desperate story of human survival had now become a trilogy. 3 unique forms of humanity, all children of the bottleneck, all carrying its scars and its strengths, now set on their own separate destinies. The great rebound from the bottleneck was not a single event, but the beginning of a grand trilogy. The single population of survivors, forged in the crucible of near extinction, had erupted outwards, its descendants taking 3 distinct paths into 3 different worlds. For the next several 100,000 years, the Earth would be home to a mosaic of humanities. To understand the rest of our story, we must first turn our gaze to the north and west, to the lineage that pushed into the cold, challenging landscapes of Ice Age Europe. These were the Neanderthals, a successful and powerful form of human, sculpted and defined by a world of ice. The world they inherited was one of dramatic and often brutal extremes. It was a landscape of advancing and retreating glaciers, of long, dark winters and brief, explosive summers. This environment acted as a powerful selective force, shaping the Neanderthal body into a masterpiece of cold weather adaptation. They were shorter and more robustly built than us, with thick, dense bones and a powerful barrel-chested physique designed to conserve heat in a frigid world. Their skulls were long and low, but housed a brain that was, on average, even larger than our own today. Their most distinctive feature was a projecting mid-face with massive nasal passages, a natural heating and humidifying system for the cold, dry air they breathed. They were not a brutish, primitive side branch of our family tree. They were a different kind of human, perfectly and beautifully adapted to one of the most demanding environments on the planet. This physical mastery was paired with a sophisticated and innovative mind, for the Neanderthals were not just surviving in the Ice Age, they were thriving as its apex predators. They were master hunters, capable of systematically and strategically taking down the most formidable megafauna of their time, from woolly rhinos to giant cave bears.
Their success was built on a foundation of sophisticated technology and cognitive skill. They were the inventors of the first hafted tools, a major leap in human ingenuity. They learned to attach carefully crafted stone points to wooden shafts, creating powerful and deadly spears. This process required complex, multi-stage planning, from gathering the different materials to understanding the properties of adhesives like plant resins and animal sinew. They also perfected what archaeologists call prepared core techniques for making their stone tools. Instead of just chipping a rock until it was sharp, a Neanderthal would first carefully shape the core stone, preparing it so that a single, precise strike would produce a perfect flake tool of a predetermined size and shape. This was not just tool-making, it was a form of manufacturing, a sign of a complex planning mind at work. And yet, for all their physical power and technological skill, perhaps the most profound evidence of the Neanderthals' humanity is found in the quiet moments they left behind. They were the first human species to systematically and intentionally bury their dead. In caves across Europe and the Near East, they laid their companions to rest in carefully dug graves, sometimes with offerings, a practice that suggests a rich inner world. This act implies a meaningful conception of death, a sense of loss, and the beginnings of ritual and symbolic thought. They were a people who not only survived, but also cared. For hundreds of thousands of years, these children of the ice reigned over their frozen kingdom. But while they mastered the West, a different human story was unfolding across the vast and mysterious continent of Asia, the story of their enigmatic cousins.
The discovery of the Great Bottleneck is more than just a new chapter in the ancient history of our species. It is a mirror held up to our modern world. The story of those 1,280 survivors clinging to existence for over 100,000 years is not just a tale of the distant past, but a profound lesson that contains both a solemn warning and an incredible promise for our future. The warning is clear and humbling. Our success is not guaranteed. The story of the bottleneck proves that our lineage has come closer to total extinction than we ever imagined, and that past climate disasters, driven by the natural cycles of the planet, have the power to decimate human populations. It reminds us that our current global civilization is not the inevitable pinnacle of evolution, but a hard-won prize, built upon a foundation of incredible luck and the tenacity of ancestors who survived conditions that killed almost everything else. As we now face a new period of rapid environmental transformation, this time of our own making, this ancient history serves as a powerful reminder that we are not invulnerable. But the promise contained within the story is even more powerful. We are the direct descendants of the ultimate survivors. We carry within our genes and our cultures the very traits that were selected for and refined under the most extreme and prolonged survival pressure our lineage has ever faced. The ancestors who made it through were not just lucky, they were supremely adaptable, endlessly innovative, and masters of cooperation. Those traits are not lost to the past. They are our inheritance. Every time you solve a complex problem, you are using the cognitive skills that were honed during the bottleneck. Every time you cooperate with strangers to achieve a common goal, you are expressing the behavioral patterns that held those tiny, fragile groups together. And every time you teach a child something new, you are participating in the knowledge-sharing traditions that carried crucial survival information across 4,000 generations of crisis. The story of the bottleneck is the ultimate testament to the resilience that is coded into our very being. It is a promise that we possess an innate, time-tested capacity to face down the impossible and find a way to endure.
The replacement of our ancient cousins, the Neanderthals and Denisovans, was not an end, but a new beginning. By 20,000 years ago, Homo sapiens stood alone on the planet, our species' long and fractured childhood finally over. But the world our ancestors inherited was plunging into the coldest and most severe phase of the entire Pleistocene epoch, the last glacial maximum. This was the heart of the Ice Age, a time when colossal sheets of ice, kilometers thick, buried vast portions of North America and Eurasia. The global climate was intensely cold and hostile, and yet, in this final crucible, our ancestors did not just endure. They thrived, pushing into the last empty continents and completing their conquest of the globe. In the frigid heartlands of Ice Age Siberia and Europe, they became the ultimate mammoth hunters. Their survival was a testament to an incredible level of cultural and technological ingenuity. Using fine bone needles, they sewed the first tailored clothing, creating multi-layered fur parkas that allowed them to endure the lethal cold. They perfected the atlat, or spear thrower, a device that let them hunt the great mammoths and steppe bison with deadly force and from a safe distance. In the depths of this frozen world, their symbolic minds blossomed. In the dark, silent caves of places like Chauvet and Lascaux and France, they created breathtaking galleries of art, capturing the spirit of the great beasts they lived alongside. This was a people with a rich and complex inner world, and it was this cultural resilience that allowed them to complete the final great migration in human history. The low sea levels had exposed a vast land bridge called Beringia, connecting Siberia to Alaska. For thousands of years, people lived on this lost subcontinent, and from there, they journeyed south, likely following a coastal route rich in marine life, to become the first people to enter and populate the Americas. With this final expansion, our species had achieved something unprecedented. We had inhabited every habitable continent on Earth, but the great ice sheets would not last forever. The world was about to warm. The glaciers were about to melt, and this great thaw would bring the era of the mammoth hunters to an end, presenting humanity with a new crisis that would lead to the single greatest transformation in our history. The conquest of the planet was complete, but the world our ancestors had mastered was a fleeting one. The Great Ice Age, which had shaped human destiny for over 2 million years, was coming to a dramatic and sudden end. As the Earth's orbit shifted in its long, slow cycle, the planet began to warm. The colossal ice sheets that had buried continents began to melt, and a great deluge was unleashed. For thousands of years, water poured back into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise by over 100 meters, inundating coastal plains, severing land bridges, and creating the coastlines we know today. The cold, dry mammoth steppe that had stretched across the northern world vanished, replaced by the inexorable advance of dense, temperate forests. The climate of our current epoch, the Holocene, had arrived, bringing with it a warm, wet, and relatively stable new reality. This great thaw triggered the last of the great extinctions. The magnificent megafauna, the Ice Age giants, who were perfectly adapted to the cold, could not cope with the rapid warming and the disappearance of their grassland habitat. The woolly mammoths, the steppe bison, the saber-toothed cats, and the giant ground sloths all vanished from the earth. Their extinction was likely accelerated by the pressure of our own ancestors, the highly skilled and sophisticated hunters who had preyed upon them for millennia. With the disappearance of these great herds,
The entire way of life that had sustained humanity through the Ice Age collapsed. The economic and cultural foundation of the mammoth hunters was gone. Humanity was faced with a profound crisis and a new choice. In this new, warmer and wetter world, people began to settle and focus on the smaller, more reliable resources around them. In a region of the Near East known as the Fertile Crescent, groups of hunter-gatherers began to intensively collect the seeds of the wild grasses, like wheat and barley, that grew in abundance on the hillsides. Over generations, a revolutionary new relationship with the natural world began to form. This was the dawn of agriculture. It was not a single brilliant invention, but a slow, gradual process of coevolution. People began to favor and replant the seeds from the most desirable plants, those with the largest grains, or those whose seeds clung to the stalk instead of scattering to the wind. This act of artificial selection, slowly, over thousands of years, transformed these wild grasses into the domesticated crops that now feed the world. At the same time, they began to manage and domesticate the local animals, like wild goats, sheep, and pigs, breeding them for docility and food. This transformation was the single most significant event in our species' history. Agriculture provided a storable, reliable food surplus for the first time, which allowed human populations to explode. No longer needing to follow the migratory herds, people began to settle down in one place, creating the first permanent villages, which would soon grow into the first towns and cities. The 2.5-million-year-old story of the nomadic hunter-gatherer was over. The foundations for the modern world, for civilization itself, had been laid.
The invention of agriculture was a complete rewriting of the human contract with the planet. For millions of years, our ancestors had been wanderers, living within the means of the natural world. Now, for the first time, they began to reshape the world to suit their own needs. This new power, rooted in a storable surplus of food, led to the final and most rapid transformation in our social history: the rise of civilization. The small, egalitarian villages of the first farmers began to grow. In the incredibly fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, the food surplus became so great that a new and radical idea became possible. Not everyone had to be a farmer. This surplus was the seed from which a new and complex world would sprout. This was the birth of specialized labor. As some individuals were freed from the daily toil of food production, they could devote their time to becoming potters, weavers, metalworkers, priests, and soldiers. This diversification created a society that was far more productive and technologically dynamic, but also one that was fundamentally unequal. To manage the irrigation systems that fed the fields, to store and distribute the grain surplus, and to organize the labor of thousands of people, a new form of social organization was required: government. A ruling class of priests and kings emerged, and the simple, kinship-based structure of the village was replaced by the rigid social pyramid of the city-state. These growing population centers evolved into the first true cities, like Iraq in Mesopotamia, bustling hubs of trade, religion, and power, protected by monumental walls and centered around towering temples. Managing the complex economy of a city like Iraq, with its thousands of citizens, its granaries, and its workshops, presented a new problem: memory. A single human mind could not possibly keep track of all the grain collected as taxes, the livestock owed to the temple, or the rations paid to laborers. The solution to this problem was another profound invention, one that marks the traditional boundary between the deep past and our own time. It was not invented for poetry or for storytelling, but for the practical, mundane purpose of accounting.
This invention was writing. On soft clay tablets, Sumerian scribes began to press pictographic symbols to keep track of their inventories. Over centuries, these pictures evolved into the abstract, wedge-shaped script we call cuneiform. This was a revolution in information technology. For the first time, knowledge could be stored and transmitted with perfect accuracy, independent of the fallible human mind. Laws could be codified, histories chronicled, and empires administered over vast distances. With the advent of writing, the long, silent era of prehistory came to a close. The human story was no longer written only in stone, bone, and genes. It was now being written by us. The pace of change, which had been measured in the geological slowness of ice ages and the patient rhythm of biological evolution, had accelerated to a blinding speed. The world of deep time, the immense and ancient story we have been tracing, had now given way to the noisy, turbulent, and ever-accelerating world of human history.
With the invention of writing, we crossed a fundamental threshold, closing the final page on the immense silent volumes of prehistory and opening the first chapter of our own recorded story. The narrative from this point forward is a familiar one, a story of civilizations and empires, of art and science, of triumphs and tragedies, all playing out on the world stage. For most of these historical millennia, we believed we knew our own origin story. Our beginnings were framed in myth and divine creation, placing us in a world that was young, purpose-built for us, and at the center of the universe. The mountains and seas were seen as a fixed and permanent stage, and our own history was believed to encompass the entirety of the world's meaningful existence. The deep, ancient, and ever-changing planet we have just spent our journey exploring was a complete and utter mystery, a book written in a language no one knew how to read. It was only in the last few seconds of our species' timeline, primarily in the 18th and 19th centuries, that we began to decipher this language and uncover the true, staggering depth of our planet's past. Geologists like James Hutton stood before rock formations, seeing layers tilted and broken, and realized that the slow, patient forces of erosion and uplift required a span of time that shattered all human conception. He saw, in the rocks, no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. And with those words, the concept of deep time was born. Naturalists like Charles Darwin, contemplating the immense diversity of life, realized that the slow, gradual process of evolution by natural selection required this very same gift of deep time. Eons upon eons for its creative work. The human-centric story began to dissolve, replaced by a new and humbling perspective. This scientific unveiling was a second great migration for humanity, not across a physical landscape, but across a conceptual one. This journey into deep time has fundamentally changed our understanding of ourselves. To learn that our planet is 4.5 billion years old, that life has existed for nearly 4 billion of those years, and that our own species appeared only in the last few 100,000, is to be profoundly reoriented. We are not the central purpose of the universe. We are a late-coming and improbable twig on an immense and ancient tree of life. But this knowledge does not diminish us. It connects us. It reveals that the calcium in our bones was forged in the heart of an exploding star, that the basic blueprint of our bodies was laid down in the Cambrian seas, and that the very stability of the world that allowed our civilizations to flourish is a temporary gift of long-term planetary cycles. The story of the Earth is not a separate story from our own. It is our story.
Our journey through deep time has shown us that the Earth is a place of immense and constant transformation. We have seen continents torn asunder, worlds frozen in ice, and life brought to the very brink of annihilation, only to rise again in new and wonderful forms. For nearly all of this 4.5 billion year history, our lineage was a passive participant, a product of these grand environmental and geological forces. But the agricultural and industrial revolutions fundamentally altered this relationship. The symbolic mind that was forged in the African crucible and the cooperative culture that allowed us to conquer the globe have now given us a new and terrifying power. The power to reshape the planet itself. We have entered a new, proposed geological epoch of our own making, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. From the perspective of deep time, the change has been shockingly abrupt. In the geological blink of an eye that is the last 2 centuries, humanity has become the single most powerful force of planetary change. Through our agriculture, our cities, and our industries, we now move more rock and soil each year than is transported by all the world's rivers combined. We have altered the course of the planet's great waterways and fundamentally changed the chemistry of its oceans. Most profoundly, by burning the fossil fuels that were laid down in the Carboniferous swamps hundreds of millions of years ago, we are reversing a planetary process, taking ancient buried sunlight and releasing its carbon back into the atmosphere at a rate that has few parallels in the geological record. We are conducting a global experiment with the planet's climate, the outcome of which is still uncertain. The echoes of our long journey through the past give us a unique and sobering context for this new reality. The story of our own near extinction taught us that climate disasters have the power to decimate even the most resilient populations. The story of the great mass extinctions taught us how quickly a planet's life support systems can collapse when its atmospheric chemistry is altered. The story of our own civilization taught us that its very existence is a gift of the Holocene, an unusually long and stable warm period, a rare and precious interlude in the turbulent history of the planet's climate. But the story of deep time is not just a cautionary tale. It is also a story of breathtaking resilience. And we are the first species in Earth's long history to be aware of our own role in the planetary drama. The same consciousness that once painted mammoths on cave walls now builds the climate models that can predict the future. The same ingenuity that chipped the first stone tool now builds the satellites that can watch our planet breathe. We are the inheritors of an unbroken 4-billion-year-old chain of life, a lineage that has survived the impossible time and time again.
Our long journey ends where it began, in the quiet contemplation of the earth as a great library of stone. We started with a profound and unsettling mystery, a missing chapter in our own story, a time when humanity almost vanished. We have traveled across the vast landscapes of deep time in search of an answer. And what we have found is a story far more intricate and beautiful than we could have imagined. The great bottleneck of 900,000 years ago, we now know, was not a simple erasure. It was a violent and creative act of planetary renewal, the crisis that pushed our ancestors to the very brink of extinction, reducing their numbers to a mere 1,280 breeding individuals, also acted as an evolutionary pressure cooker. For 117,000 years, it forged a new and more resilient kind of human, the common ancestor from which all modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans would eventually arise. The missing chapter is not a void in our story. It is the invisible foundation upon which our entire world is built. The scar that runs through our species' past is the very reason we are here to wonder at it. Looking back from this vantage point,
we can see our own improbable history not as a steady march of progress, but as a series of breathtaking survivals. We are the descendants of the tenacious synapsids that endured the Great Dying, the greatest catastrophe life has ever known. We are the inheritors of the tiny, nocturnal mammals that waited patiently for 150 million years in the shadows of the dinosaurs, honing the very traits of warmth and care that define us. We are the beneficiaries of the adaptable apes who, when their world of trees vanished, found the courage to stand on their own 2 feet and walk into a new and dangerous world. Our story is not one of inherent dominance, but of incredible, persistent resilience. And so here, on this Monday afternoon, perhaps in a place like Taytay in the Philippines or anywhere else on this earth, this immense story does not feel distant or abstract. It is intimately and profoundly present. The ground beneath your feet is a fragment of a tectonic plate, a piece of a puzzle that has been drifting and colliding for eons. The oxygen that fills your lungs with each quiet breath was a gift, slowly and patiently placed into the atmosphere by countless generations of microscopic life. And the very DNA that makes you who you are carries the direct, unbroken legacy of those 1,280 survivors. The story of our planet is not a separate story from our own. To know this history is to understand that we are not merely living on the Earth. We are the Earth, made manifest and self-aware. We are its living memory. The consciousness that can look upon a pattern in our genes and comprehend a world of ancient struggle is a remarkable thing. It is the planet's own way of reading its autobiography, a story of impossible odds and improbable survival, written in stone and in us. To trace the story of our existence is to follow a single, unbroken thread of survival back through the immense darkness of deep time. We have followed this thread through the age of dinosaurs, past the world's greatest extinction, and back to a moment of profound fragility when our entire lineage was a flicker of light on the verge of being extinguished. This knowledge, unearthed only recently in 2023, does more than just tell us where we came from. It redefines who we are in the present. The revelation that our entire lineage was once reduced to a fragile band of only 1,280 survivors is more than just a scientific fact. It is a profound reorientation of who we are. It is a story that should fill us not with a sense of pride in our dominance, but with a quiet and humbling awe for the simple fact of our existence. For 117,000 years, our ancestors held on, and in that crucible of survival, the very essence of our humanity was forged. The capacity for deep social cooperation, the instinct to teach our children, and the restless ingenuity that allows us to adapt to any challenge, these are not recent developments. They are the ancient survival skills that were selected for under the most intense pressure imaginable. We are the inheritors of the minds that learned how to survive in a world that had fallen apart. This knowledge changes our place in the story. We are not the inevitable masters of the planet. We are the improbable survivors of a planetary catastrophe, the descendants of a tiny group that refused to let the human story end. And as this quiet Monday draws to a close, perhaps in a place like Taytay, or perhaps on the other side of the world where a new day is just beginning, this ancient story feels deeply present. It is a story that reminds us that our greatest strengths were born from our deepest vulnerabilities. The resilience that carried our ancestors through that long night is the same resilience we carry within us today. The story of life on this planet is one of unbroken continuity, a 4 billion-year-old thread of survival that has persisted through every imaginable cataclysm. We are the current custodians of that thread. The library of the Earth is vast, and many of its pages remain unread. But tonight, we have read one of its most important stories, the story of how we almost weren't, and how, against all odds, we came to be. Thank you for listening.
Though our main story of survival and eventual expansion has concluded, the library of our past contains deeper, more detailed appendices, chapters that explore the very evidence that makes this story so compelling. Let us now turn to one of the most powerful of these proofs, a permanent scar left not on stone, but etched into our very chromosomes. For over a century, scientists have known of a curious puzzle at the heart of our genetic identity. While our closest great ape relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, have 48 chromosomes, we humans have only 46. For a long time, the fate of this missing pair was a mystery, but the answer is a profound confirmation of our species' near-death experience. We did not lose a chromosome. 2 of our ancestral chromosomes fused together, end to end, to create the single large chromosome we now call human chromosome 2. The evidence for this ancient merger is undeniable, written in the very structure of the chromosome itself. All chromosomes in our cells have 2 distinct features, a central point called a centromere, and protective, repeating sequences of DNA called telomeres, which are found only at the very ends of a chromosome, like the plastic tips on a shoelace. When scientists examined our chromosome 2, they found the smoking gun. In the middle of this long chromosome, exactly where a fusion would have occurred, are the dormant, fused together remains of telomere sequences. Furthermore, while a normal chromosome has only 1 centromere, chromosome 2 has the molecular remnants of a second, deactivated centromere. It is the perfect molecular scar, the precise evidence you would expect to find from 2 chromosomes being joined into 1. This incredibly rare genetic event happened right in the middle of the Great Bottleneck. In a large, thriving population, such a dramatic mutation would likely be a disadvantage and vanish in the vastness of the gene pool. But in a tiny, desperate population of only 1,280 breeding individuals, a rare genetic quirk can, by chance and circumstance, spread rapidly, becoming a universal feature of the entire species in just a few generations. Some researchers believe this was more than just an accident. The genetic shakeup caused by this fusion may have played a role in our cognitive evolution, as some of the genes located near the fusion site are known to affect neural function. The very event that scarred our genome may have helped accelerate the evolution of the human brain. While this genetic evidence is undeniable, the story written in stone from this same period is one of profound and telling silence, a mystery in its own right.
The story of the Great Bottleneck is more than just a tale of survival. It is our species' foundational myth, written not in stone tablets, but in our own DNA. The 117,000 years our ancestors spent in that evolutionary crucible left a permanent and profound ghost in our machine, an echo that shapes our modern lives in ways we are only just beginning to understand. The most obvious scars are the ones that speak to our fragility. During the crisis, our lineage lost an estimated 65% of its total genetic diversity. This genetic impoverishment has consequences we live with today. It is why, as a species, we are unusually susceptible to certain diseases and have weaker immune systems compared to other primates. In a strange and poetic way, our modern weakness is the most definitive proof of our ancestors' ancient strength. But for every scar, the bottleneck bestowed a gift. The crisis forged the very traits that now define our success. It explains our unique capacity for large-scale cooperation.
For 4,000 generations, survival was only possible through intense collaboration, and natural selection ruthlessly filtered for individuals who could share, trust, and work together. It also explains our obsession with teaching. In a group where losing the knowledge of a single elder could be catastrophic, there was immense selective pressure for those who were best at transmitting information to the next generation. We became a species addicted to learning and sharing what we learned. Perhaps the most profound legacy of this shared trauma, however, is the simple biological proof of our fundamental unity. The genetic discovery of the bottleneck completely obliterates the idea of meaningful biological races. Every single person alive on Earth today, all 8 billion of us, descends from that same tiny group of approximately 1,280 survivors. The genetic differences between any two human populations are smaller than the differences found within a single troop of chimpanzees. We are one family, bound by the memory of a time when we almost weren't a family at all.
The warning. The first and most sobering lesson from the bottleneck is a warning. Our history proves that human success is never guaranteed, and that our species is not invulnerable to the forces of planetary change. Past climate disasters have brought human populations to the very brink of extinction. As we now face another period of rapid environmental transformation, this time largely of our own making, the story of our ancestors serves as a powerful reminder of the potential consequences. Our current dominance of the planet does not make us exempt from the fundamental laws of nature. It simply raises the stakes. The promise. But the story is also a profound promise. We are the direct genetic and cultural descendants of the ultimate survivors. The ancestors who made it through the 117,000-year-long crisis were not just lucky, they were supremely adaptable, innovative, and cooperative. Those traits were not lost to the past. They are our inheritance, the essential toolkit that was selected for under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The bottleneck is a testament to our species' innate capacity for resilience. It is a promise that we carry within us the ability to face down seemingly impossible challenges and find a way to endure. The ancestors within us. This ancient legacy is not an abstract concept. It echoes in our modern lives in countless ways. Every time you solve a complex problem, you are using the cognitive skills that were refined during the bottleneck. Every time you cooperate with strangers to achieve a common goal, you are expressing the behavioral patterns that kept those tiny, fragile groups alive for millennia. And every time you teach a child something new, you are participating in the knowledge-sharing traditions that carried crucial survival information across 4,000 generations of crisis. If our ancestors, with only stone tools and fire, could survive a world that had fallen apart, then we, with all our modern knowledge, possess the same fundamental capacity to face the challenges of our own time. Our deep history is not a burden. It is our greatest source of strength. The story 4 billion years long. The story of the Great Bottleneck, as profound as it is just one chapter in a much larger and more ancient story. It is the story of an unbroken thread of life, stretching back not for 1,000,000 years, but for nearly 4 billion, to the first spark of life in the Earth's primordial oceans. This single, continuous thread has persisted through every imaginable cataclysm the planet has endured.
It survived the oxygenation of the atmosphere that was poisonous to the world's first microbes. It survived the planetary deep freezes of Snowball Earth. It passed through the 5 great mass extinctions, including the Permian Great Dying that wiped out over 90% of all species. It survived the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs. And, as we now know, it survived a crisis 900,000 years ago that reduced our own ancestors to a population of just 1,280 breeding individuals for 117,000 years. Our existence is not a given. It is the result of an almost impossible chain of survivals. The ancestors within us. This immense history is not something external to us. It is the very fabric of our being. Your body is a living museum, a biological library containing relics from every major chapter of life's story. The basic salt balance of your blood is an echo of the ancient seas where the first cells evolved. Your spine is a direct legacy of the first fish that swam in the Cambrian oceans. The warm blood that courses through your veins and the hair on your skin are the inheritance of the tiny nocturnal mammals that survived in the shadows of the dinosaurs. And the adaptable, problem-solving mind that allows you to comprehend this very story is the gift of those few thousand ancestors who survived the Great Bottleneck. You are not just a product of human history, but of planetary history, a walking, thinking archive of 4 billion years of resilience. The planet's memory. In the entire long history of life on this planet, we are the first species to become aware of this story. We are the first part of this unbroken thread to be able to look back and read the pages of the library from which we came. This is a profound and humbling realization. The human mind is not just a tool for our own survival. It is the planet's way of knowing itself, the consciousness that can comprehend the immense, slow dance of continents, the violence of mass extinctions, and the quiet desperation of our own mere extinction, is the culmination of this 4 billion year journey. We are the living memory of the Earth, and in this knowledge lies a quiet and immense responsibility.
The scars of survival. The Great Bottleneck is more than just a chapter in our ancient history. It is a ghost that lives within our very cells, shaping our modern lives in ways we are only just beginning to understand. The scars of that long crisis are perhaps the most immediate. During the 117,000-year ordeal, our lineage lost an estimated 65% of its total genetic diversity. This has profound consequences for us today. It is the reason why, as a species, we are unusually susceptible to certain diseases and have weaker immune systems compared to other primates. Our relative genetic uniformity, a direct result of descending from so few ancestors, makes us vulnerable. In a strange and poetic way, our modern fragility is the most definitive proof of our ancestors' ancient and unbreakable strength. The gifts of the crucible. But for every scar, the bottleneck bestowed a gift. The crisis was an evolutionary pressure cooker that forged the very traits that now define our success. It is the reason for our unique human abilities. Hyper-cooperation. Our incredible ability to cooperate in large, complex groups was forged by 4,000 generations where collaboration wasn't just useful, it was the only way anyone survived. The teaching instinct. Our obsession with teaching and social learning was a direct result of the desperate need to preserve vital, fragile knowledge across generations. Innate ingenuity. Our unique relationship with technology and problem solving was ruthlessly selected for, in a world where innovation was a life or death skill. The unbreakable bond. Perhaps the most profound legacy of our shared trauma
is the simple biological proof of our fundamental unity. The genetic discovery of the bottleneck obliterates the idea of meaningful biological races. Every single person alive on Earth today, all 8 billion of us, descends from that same tiny group of approximately 1,280 survivors. The genetic differences between any two human populations are smaller than the differences found within a single troop of chimpanzees. This ancient story teaches us a crucial lesson. As the source material so eloquently states, there's no them, there's only us. We are one family, bound forever by the memory of a time when we almost weren't a family at all. This shared inheritance is the final, humbling truth of our journey.
The unbroken thread. When we look back across the immense vista of deep time, the story of life on Earth is a story of survival against impossible odds. It is an unbroken thread stretching for nearly 4 billion years, a single, continuous lineage that has persisted through every cataclysm the planet has endured. This thread survived the great mass extinctions that sterilized the seas. It survived the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs. And it survived the Great Bottleneck 900,000 years ago, a crisis that reduced our own direct ancestors to a fragile band of just 1,280 breeding individuals. The single greatest lesson from the Library of the Earth is one of profound and unrelenting resilience. A story written in you, licensed by Google. This immense history is not something separate from you. It is the very fabric of your being. And so, as this quiet Monday draws to a close, perhaps in a place like Taytay in the Philippines, or perhaps on the other side of the world where a new day is just beginning, this ancient story feels deeply present. The ground beneath your feet is a fragment of a tectonic plate, a piece of a puzzle that has been drifting and colliding for eons. The oxygen that fills your lungs with each quiet breath was a gift slowly and patiently placed into the atmosphere by countless generations of microscopic life. And the very DNA that makes you who you are is the direct, unbroken legacy of those bottleneck survivors. The consciousness that allows you to comprehend this story is the ultimate product of this long journey. You are not just a reader of the Earth's history. You are a living chapter, the Earth's library. In the entire long story of life on this planet, we are the first species to become aware of this story. We are the first part of this unbroken thread to be able to look back and read the pages of the library from which we came. This is a profound and humbling realization. The human mind is not just a tool for our own survival. It is the planet's way of knowing itself. The story of deep time is not meant to make us feel small, but to make us feel connected, to remind us of our shared inheritance and our bond with the living world. The library is vast, and many pages remain unread. But tonight, we have read one of its most important stories, the story of how we almost weren't, and how, against all odds, we came to be. Thank you